sure I had them worried at the back. They thought I hadn't turned my microphone on. They were right. But it's on now, I think, God. Thank you. We've been studying from the book of Galatians for several Sundays, and we're going to look there again this morning. I'm not going to try to do everything in the book of Galatians because you are going to study this book in Sunday school before long, and I don't need to do it all before that time comes. But I wanted us, and we began this way, we talked about Paul's conversion back in the book of Acts several weeks ago, and you remember that he was on his way to persecute Christians. God knocked him down, blinded him temporarily, spoke to him, and Paul understood that you cannot, by keeping the law and doing works yourself, get yourself in a relationship with God so that you can go to heaven when you die. Because you are a sinner. And one sin makes you a sinner, and because we are sinful, we are not right with God. But we need to have that fixed somehow. And so Paul had always thought, all of his life, up until that experience on the road to Damascus, that the way you fix that was doing everything you could possibly do to pay God back by keeping his rules or keeping the law of the Old Testament. But the more he tried to keep the law, the more frustrated he was, and the harder he worked, and he just about worked himself into a frenzy trying to destroy this new movement called Christianity. Back then they were calling it the way of Jesus, but the way, he was trying to destroy that and hold up the old way that he was working to get God's forgiveness and God's favor. When God struck him down, temporarily blinded him, God spoke to him in a way that he listened and he heard. And God said basically to him, the only way to be right with God is to admit you are a sinner, to admit that you are weak, to admit that you have failed, and just simply ask God and trust God to forgive you, to get you in a right relationship with him, and to help you live your life the best way. In other words, a way of works on one hand, and a way of faith on the other hand. Now, the rest of what we've been saying on Sunday morning about Paul's experience of salvation, we have read in the book of Galatians. He began to minister to others and share his experience with others about how to be right with God. And he ran into some opposition because the Jewish people had, for a long, long time, been the power of religion among the Jewish folk. And the way to be right with God, they said, was by keeping the law. You need to be perfect, but since you mess up, you'll keep the law. You can work yourself back into the situation. Basically, it sounds this way. Let me say this, it's kind of funny, but think about this. If you work hard enough and do the right thing often enough, you'll put God in your debt. And you can work yourself to the place that God will have to take care of you. That's what it means. Keep the law, do the right thing, do everything you're supposed to do, and God kind of owes you. But you still are a sinner. You don't do it right. You keep messing up. You keep leaving stuff out. So Paul is saying to the church at Galatia, now remember when I was there, I preached to you about believing in Jesus, being forgiven of sin, receiving the gift of eternal life, and that's the way it is. Now some of you, he said, have begun to listen to the old teachers again. And you're kind of wavering between accepting God's salvation as a free gift and doing some things that makes God have to do some things for you. Now, here was the problem. As Paul preached, and then later as he writes, and as they in Galatia and other places are talking about what Paul has said, some of them are beginning to say, well, why do you keep bringing up Paul? Paul's not one of the apostles. And Paul's first answer in Galatians was, I was made an apostle by God the Father and his Son, the Lord Jesus. Well, when he proves, in a sense, to them that he is an apostle, they say, yeah, but he's got the message all wrong. When he said he was called, he should have gone to Jerusalem and let the leaders of the movement there authenticate him. And he said, I didn't need to do that. God himself gave me the message. Then you remember we talked about what he did. He went away to Arabia for a while, trying to think through all that this meant and how he was going to best serve God for the rest of his life. And then he came back and began to preach again at Damascus and later in other places. And then in time, when it was necessary, he wrote to the new Christians in Galatia, trying to be sure they were on the right track. Now, with all that as kind of the summary of the last several weeks, I want us today to come to look at some things that Paul is saying to them about practical things of how they ought to live their lives. Now, we're not just talking in these passages about how to receive salvation, how to get God's forgiveness, but how should you live day by day so that you need to please God, not to earn salvation. You just need to please God because it's right. You can't be good enough, but here's what you try to do. And he gives us what we're going to read this morning, two separate lists. One list he gives is what not to do, and the other list is what you ought to do. What's not to do is what will happen when you try to do it yourself. What is to do is what will happen when you let God do it through you. Now, I never had thought about this much myself, but I read again in a commentary this week, and the reason I say it again, I'm sure I have read this before. I've used that same commentary for years and years and years, but I noticed this time as I read, the man who was writing the commentary, sharing some information with it, said somewhat like this. He said that people back in New Testament days, such as Paul and other people, had kind of an affinity for making lists. You know, they would think of things to do and they would write them down. And even if they thought of things not to do, they would write these down to remind them. And it was kind of a way back then of, doing that thing. Now, I see people all the time now take their telephone out and put something in their phone they don't want to forget. Or they add something to their list that way. I've never been much to make lists. My wife makes lists. She makes lists on Saturday night what to do Sunday morning. And Sunday morning what to do Sunday evening. Now she's not bad. I'm just kidding her. But she does make lists. And she pretty well follows them. But I figured out after 50, how many years? 8 years? 58 years. That's on my list. I'll say that again. I got a good look there. I found out after 58 lists, she usually makes those lists not so much for her, but for me. What we're going to do means what Lynn's going to do. Our grocery list is not to remind her when she gets there. It's to hand to me so I can go there and bring it back home. You know what I'm saying? All right. Well, list for list, okay? Now, as soon as I'm being here, I want us to look at two lists. Now, when you look at lists, and if there's a lot of things on them, it really is kind of boring. And I want to tell you two things about being bored, and then we'll come to let you look at these. Number one is, one reason after I have done chapter 1, I'm not going to do the next 2 or 3 chapters in Galatians, is it pretty much is repetitious. Says it differently, but it says the same thing over and over and over. We already talked about that. You can try to do it yourself. You can try to do it by keeping the law. You're going to mess up. You can admit you can't do it yourself, and in faith accept Jesus as your Savior. God's going to take care of it. Over and over and over and over, he says the same thing through Galatians until we get to chapter 5 and chapter 6. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put in the King James translation, New King James, we're going to put these verses up, and then I'm going to read from another translation as you see that, and you can see the different words that we can think about, okay? So, Galatians chapter 5, in the bulletin it says one thing. I changed it this morning for time's sake, and we're going to read beginning at verse 19, okay? So if you'll find that. Look at your Bible, or you can look on the screen. By the way, we're trying, and this is good, I think, they've been trying to get some different ways so that you can see this better. And this is a lot better than what we've had for the last several weeks. And Appreciate the people in the sound booth working on this and getting it fixed for it. But it shows up good that way. Now, the works of the flesh are evident. So list number one that we're going to see this morning are the works of the flesh. And he starts naming them, okay? So this is Galatians chapter 5, verse 19. Now, this translation doesn't say the works of the flesh. It says it this way. What human nature does is quite plain. You ever hear somebody say, oh, well, I'm just doing what comes naturally? Well, sometimes that works, but sometimes that can get you in a heap of trouble. You need to do what comes naturally when it's the right thing to do, but you need to say no when it's the wrong thing. But we find if we don't let God control us, when we try to say no to something, we do it anyhow. But if we somehow can have God's power in our mind, our heart, and life, we can say no to the things that would harm us and only allow those things that are good to be a part of our lives. Now, I'm going to read this paragraph. I want you to look at the words on the screen or in your translation. They are different than what I'm reading. But see if you can follow one by one, or something like that. There are a dozen or so different words here that are listed as the works of the flesh. All right. What human nature does is quite plain. It shows itself in immoral, filthy, and indecent actions, in worship of idols and witchcraft. People become enemies and they fight. They become jealous, angry, and ambitious. They separate into parties and groups. They are envious, get drunk, have orgies, and do other things like these. I warn you now, as I have before, those who do these things will not possess the kingdom of God. Now, as I said, depending on the translation, there's more than a dozen different thoughts or words there. Some of what I have read will have maybe 2 words saying that, or one thing might say 3 or 4 things, but the ideas that are there are about a dozen or so. But a scholar of some years ago was recognized as a man of good judgment, and he took this list and he said, well, you know, no matter how you say it, what translation you use, reading from the Greek of the New Testament or any translation of it, you'll come to see that there are 4 sections here, or 4 groups described by all of these different words. So what I want us to do briefly is I want us to look at these 4 groups. Okay? Now, if you just do what comes naturally, or if you just say, I can handle this myself, I don't need God, I can do whatever needs to be done, you'll find some of these things popping up in your life and sometimes defeating you, overcoming you, embarrassing you, hurting you, and disappointing God about you. So let's look at this. The first group. You can look at all these words, some of them we'll look back at. First group has to do with what he calls sensual difficulties. I think maybe he said that because in his day you would not have said what we're so easily talking about today. So let me be real blunt. He's talking mainly about sexual impurity. Okay? Did you notice the first words a little different there? Immoral, filthy, and indecent actions. Now those are kind of plain, but they don't say exactly plainly enough. Here's what these words mean in the New King James on the screen. Sensual means sexual impurity, adultery, unfaithfulness to your spouse, to your companion. Fornication is among people that are not married, but sexual impurity. Uncleanliness or uncleanness and lewdness. You know, without trying to embarrass us, even the way I'm saying some of these, you just kind of feel, I don't like to hear that. I don't like to hear it at church. I don't like to hear the preacher say some of those words. Don't like to think about it. But you know, God made us male and female. And in the relationship of marriage, sexual relations are part of God's plan. It's when outside of marriage we try to live as if we were married with different people, and we mess up God's plan, and we usually mess up our lives and the lives of others. In the works of the flesh that are sensual and misuse of sexual things. You know the definitions there, but I want you to think of just one word of those four. The word uncleanness. Now this is ugly. This kind of makes you feel bad to even say it. The word actually is a word that was used for talking about, and this sounds terrible, pus that builds and collects in a wound that you have. Now he's not talking about a physical injury. He's describing the misuse of the holy things God has given us between husband and wife. When it is misused, it is as ugly and like pus in a physical wound. Now you can think without me trying to make it more plain. Couldn't be much plainer. But anything that you can think about that we ought not do in the realm of sensual things is a work of just doing what the flesh wants instead of letting God control us. So the first group is the group of sensual things that are mentioned, the first four words, 3 or 4 depending on the translation. And the second group is this. It has to do with idolatry. And then the other word there on your translation we're seeing on the screen is sorcery. Now the word idolatry means to worship something that we have made with our own hands. Okay? Now in the Bible you have pictures from time to time. This is tragic, but it's always so foolish to think about this. I need to find a good place over here to build a shelf. Now I don't have the tools to do it, probably would mess it up. But can you imagine me building a wooden shelf, say about this high, just maybe this way, a brace or two under it, 6 or 8 inches maybe, or a little more out from the wall. And then I take a piece of wood or rock, and either with a chisel or with other tools, I form some sort of animal-like figure. And based on how well off I am, I may overlay that with silver or gold. And I might even put some precious stones where the eyes would be, or other things about it. Perhaps with metal, I would then have it engraved somehow. You know, Now, I take this thing that I've made over to this shelf that I've made, and by the way, I got it straight, didn't it? Can you see it? Okay. And I put this shelf here, now I put this up here, this animal-like, gold overlaid, silver overlaid, engraved, and stones. And then I back off from it, and instead of looking and say, oh, that's a pretty piece of art, I bow down to my knees and pray to it for it to help me. I made it. How's it going to help me? It's not alive. It's a piece of wood. It's a different shape now. It's overlaid now. It's got in you know. But that's what idolatry is. Making something, bowing before it, and asking this thing that you have made to take care of you. Now, some of us wouldn't do that, but carrying a lucky rabbit's foot, or a lucky coin, or something else. You know, things that we can control and handle, they can't fix us. That's what he's saying. Let's make this real down where it makes us think a minute. What else could we have as an idol that we've made with our hands that we might worship? How about our monetary success? How about our career? How about our savings account? Anything that we make and then we put in the place of God becomes an idol, and we're idolaters. You see the point that he's making. Sorcery here has to do with witchcraft. Now, I don't know what definition you might use for witchcraft, but let me tell you what this is really saying, and this will knock your socks off if you've never heard it before. Did you know back in New Testament times, there were priests, not any religious priests like we would think, but priests of different religions, and some of them used drugs to put the people in a mood for this kind of religion to be sensational in their lives. I see that. I can hardly not think that there are a lot of people today that are addicted to drugs, and there's a sense in which that's become their God, and the feeling and the high they get with that is what they live for. And then as they destroy themselves, they cover it up with even more and keep wanting that to fix it. Could you remember that this is a letter that Paul wrote? I've been saying it's a letter kind of like you'd get a letter that's got some important information, and you keep that letter to refer to again. Folks, if we want to see what the world ought not do in the realm of sensual things and now in religious things about idolatry and witchcraft, all we need to do is read back. Works of the flesh, works of the mind, things that you do yourself, human nature, this is where it takes us. Third group, the man says, out of all of these, we can see selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies. Go to the next verse, if you will, for us, please. Envy, murders, okay, has to do with personal relationships. How we get along or don't get along. How we treat others or want them to treat us. How selfish we are. How much we use people. How much we don't care about these sort of things. One of these words, depending on how it is translated, has to do kind of with jealousies or emulations, as they're called. And it's this more than anything else. It's seeing someone who is successful and someone who's doing pretty well, and we see him and we call it jealousy sometimes, and we say, man, I wish I had what he has. Did you know you go even a step beyond that, kind of in the same neighborhood? I don't necessarily want to have what he has. I just don't want him to have it. That's even worse, I think. See something that's attractive, and I wish I could have that. Don't mean I'm going to take it or go for him to have it. I wish I could have it too. But it's even worse to say, well, I know I'll never have that, but I wish he didn't. We had some problems in Southern Baptist Convention, some of y'all remember 20 years ago or so. It lasted about 25, 30 years. Two major groups, the established group, the new group that wanted to fuss at this, and then they got to fussing at this, and they got to accusing here, defending here, back and forth. And it lasted so long, and I have said this everywhere, I was never really a part of that argument. We were Baptist General Convention of Texas, and we remained that way. And we stayed nationally as Southern Baptist Convention. That's where I was preaching. We didn't go into all that. But I kept saying to folks, you know, it's one thing to want to prove that you're right. But what that got into was not so much trying to prove that you are right as it got to be proving the other person was wrong. You didn't care if you were right as long as you could make him look bad. That's human nature. That's the flesh. That's a sinful way of living our lives. Personal relationships. Just doing whatever you want to, doing how you think. Human nature. Sin's works of the flesh. Fourth group. And this guy listed this one completely separate. And it doesn't even show in some here, but it's very plain in this translation. It says they separate into parties and groups. They are envious, get drunk, and then back to some other sensual things. In the four groups that the scholar years ago, and many, many years ago met, the four groups again, the sensational area, sexual, idolatry, personal relationships, how we treat one another, live together, and fourth, he listed completely separate, drunkenness. You understand the term, the word, you know what it means and what it does to people and what it does to life. My question is, in some of these things, is anybody standing up against them? Yes, they are. But you know, some things that you and I used to stand against and never be embarrassed to be against it, we often just overlook nowadays. Jeannie reminded me the other night, we were talking at church and in other places too about this, but I often refer to Dr. Colin Yates, that was my favorite professor, I guess, through all my schooling, but certainly at Baylor. And Dr. Yates, in talking about some of the prophets, says that the worst thing about sin is that it cuts the optic nerve of the soul. The optic nerve is what you see with, you know, opticians, seeing. The optic nerve has to do with sight. And he said sin cuts the optic nerve of the soul. Now, if you don't understand that, what it means is this. When you look at something that used to everybody thought was wrong and we were against it, now you look at the same thing and say, well, I don't see anything wrong with that. And then Dr. Yates would say the trouble is you used to see what was wrong with that. But Satan and the world and pleasure and sinfulness and soul control, that what you knew was so wrong at one time, you just overlook and say, well, I don't see anything wrong with it. Or, that's not really that bad. Now, without trying to give all of the definitions of all of those words, you see a list in Paul's writing to the church at Galatia. Here are some things that happen because you just live by human nature, by the flesh. And by the way, often in the Bible, and I didn't say this earlier, and I think you know this, but let me just, in case you don't catch this, when it talks about the flesh, there's a difference in saying just the flesh and the human body or the natural functions or the things that are, when it just says the flesh in the Bible, what it usually means is your natural body when you leave God out. When you include God in your marriage, there's nothing wrong with the relationship. That's how you have your children. That's how families go. That's how the world continues. God's included, ought to be. But there's some folks who just do everything themselves and never give God a thought. And when you think about that, you say, here's the flesh. Just doing what feels good or what you want to do and not thinking about right, wrong consequences, God's will, other people's feelings, etc., etc. So one list, and I hope it wasn't boring, but I hope you'll remember that these things that bother us today are in the Bible. And what so many folks in our society today want to justify, God says, leave it alone. And sometimes I suppose what I'm trying to say in another way is we just get too sophisticated for our own good. But when you talk about God being the same yesterday, today, and forever, we ought to apply it to some of those things. You know how we apply it usually? We usually apply when we say God the same yesterday, today, and together. Say, well, God did that then, He'll do that now. God did miracles then, He can do it for me now. Well, God can. But most of the time when we're talking about God yesterday, today, and forever being the same, it's His attitude, His opinion, and His word about what's right and wrong. And the works of the flesh are still those forbidden things for God's people. Well, let's look at the other list. This starts in verse 22. And in the King James translation, it says, and this is the New King James edition that we have before us, and it says this, we've been talking about the works of the flesh. Now this is different. The fruit of the Spirit. I don't know if we ought to put too much meaning to the fruit there being singular. It's kind of like all of these things ought to be part of it. It doesn't say the fruits, take your pick. No, the fruit is a big fruit's kind of got all this as part of it. Don't say, okay, I do 2 out of 4 here, 5 out of 6, there's 9 of these. But yeah, I do majority of them. No, we ought to do all these. So let's look and see if we can see it, and you'll understand most of these without much explanation. But here, if you let God really have control of your mind, your heart, your body, your soul, your spirit, if you'll think about Him and what He wants, by the way, I have said this many other times, let me say it here. God never tells you not to do anything that would be good for you to do. He never just says, don't do this to see if you'll like it. You know, never a test. It's for your benefit. Don't do this. It'll hurt you. And those things of the flesh, those works of the flesh, He says, don't do that. They'll eat you. Anything God tells you to do will make it better. Again, He never tells you to do something just if you'll do it. He tells you to do something because it's going to make things better. So let's look. But the fruit of the Spirit, or this one says this, but the Spirit produces love. Now, love, what's that mean to you? Love. Valentine, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, all that can be included. But the word for love, as you know in the Bible, is translated to English love, but it could be one of 4 different words that mean love in the Greek language. Let me give it just real quickly. There's a love that's in the words, not in the Bible, I think, but it's a Greek word for love, and it just means love between a man and a woman. Just kind of sensual love that we've been talking about. Not marriage, not family, just the physical love. And then there's a word, phileo, Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. It means not just what eros means, that's the first word, but Philadelphia word that means love like for your brother. You really care about people. You like them. You want everything good for them. Then there's a third word that means love like a mother and father have for their child. Now, sometimes I know because of various reasons it doesn't happen, but most of the time, almost all the time, You don't have to tell a mother to love the baby she's just given birth to. That's just, naturally it can be. So those are love. But this word, and it's the word used here, it's agape, and it means a love like God has, and it means a love that you have for someone regardless if he deserves it, regardless if he responds to it, regardless if he returns it. You look out for him, you care for him, you want the best for him, no matter how he responds to your attempt to make things better. I'm going to make up my mind. I don't know what he says back. I don't know what he does. I don't care what, I care. I want to make his life better. That's what happens when God controls us. And when you see people do the wrong thing, you don't want to just punish them, though sometimes punishment's necessary by law or by individuals. But you see them and you don't want them to do it because it hurts them. And sometimes you tell them and they get all upset at you and embarrass you and push you away and break your heart. But you keep trying because you love them. Whether they ever do anything good for me or not, I still want the best for them. And that's how we ought to be about our family and our neighbors and our friends and what some people would even want to say, our enemies. Jesus talked to us about those that won't be our friends, that we ought to pray for them. We ought to help, and we ought to love, and we ought to try to make things different. Love. Well, you understand that. Here's what God's Spirit. If God's in our life, if we're following him, this just automatically comes to us. Joy. Joy. Happiness. Now, there's a sense in which joy is different than happiness, though I use both words. Happy can be happy because we got a new gift, had a good meal, had a good time, don't have to work on Monday, We can just be happy about that. But joy is deeper and bigger than that. Joy means this sense of security and rightness and goodness and nothing can take my joy away. And I have a joy that lasts even during adverse times. I can be in pain, I can be embarrassed, I can be insulted, people can mistreat me, but I have a joy because I know God's love. He gave his Son to be my Savior. And no matter what worldly things can happen and do to me in an injurious way, if the worst came and my life were taken, I still can have joy because I'm going to go be with the Lord in heaven forever and ever and ever. It's knowing the outcome, in a sense. And knowing the final outcome is so wonderful that I can put up with anything that happens now. Long-suffering is one of the words here. It's kind of like that. I can look not only at the short term, but I look at the long term. And yeah, this is going to be painful and I don't like it, but it's worth it. That's what God has for me. Peace. Same kind of idea here. We know that we are in the hands of God. Long-suffering means not just putting up with things, as I mentioned a while ago, but long-suffering is wonderful in the Bible. Let me tell you what it means, and you'll find some places you can put this into practice, I believe. Long-suffering means that you have a courageous patience. Means I can put up with it till I can help change it. We have a rebellious child or a rebellious friend or, and sometimes it hurts. Oh, yes, it hurts. We don't want it to stay that way. We want it to change. We want that person to change. We want what's best for him or her. But do you just own them and kick them out and say, I don't care? No, you keep trying. You keep praying for them. You keep loving. Sometimes it gets to the place you can't say anything to them, can't even bring it up again because it causes another flare-up. But you keep loving them. And you have the patience to love them, and no matter how much they hurt you, you still love them. At the same time, you're praying for a change, you're praying for their conversion, you're doing what you can to teach them and show them and love them and change them. But you don't give up on them. Long suffering. Sometimes it hurts. Most of the time it hurts when you have that kind of relationship with anyone. But you have the patience, but it's not just patience of putting up with. It's putting up with until it can be the way it's supposed to. There's a difference in saying, oh well, help us, won't do any good. Keep trying. Gentleness is a word. Kindness. Goodness. Faith. But you know, when it says faith, it doesn't just mean faith, and in some translations that's what's there. But in the King James there, it doesn't say faith, it says faithfulness. Same word. Faith or faithfulness. And it means pretty much what you would think. You just stop thinking. When you say somebody's faithful, you mean he's reliable. You know what he's going to do. There's some folks that their reactions surprise us from time to time, shock us. But we know some people, and we just know beforehand what their reaction's going to be. They are reliable. You can count on them. You know, this is kind of a double-edged sword I'm going to say right now. I'm going to tell you what it is, but I'm going to tell you it ought not to be that way all the time in church. You know why some folks at church are overloaded with too many responsibilities? There are two reasons. Number one is we know that if he says he'll do it or she says she'll do it, it'll get done. So we ask them every time. Well, they always come through. They'll do it. You can count on them. They're reliable. The other reason the folks at church are overloaded is because some folks at church don't carry enough load. They let everybody else do it. If you're one of these people that says, I can do that, but you never have, tell somebody you'll do it. If you're a kind of person that looks at somebody at church and says, they're trying to run things, you volunteer to do some of those things. Get some of that off them, they won't be running things. We ought to be reliable. We ought to get done. But we ought to share that. And I guarantee you the folks in your church and any other church that are really reliable and really faithful of what they're asked to do and keep doing it, they'd welcome your help and they'd gladly step aside and let you take some. So keep on. Keep on. That's what the idea is. And this is a fruit of the Spirit. What's that mean? It means this is something the Spirit of God does in you. We talked about the works of the flesh. You can't do these things by yourself. God's Spirit has to give you love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and reliability. It's His word. Two other words are mentioned there. Meekness is one. Meekness. That's one of the Beatitudes. It's one that kind of surprises folks. What's it mean to be meek? The Spirit can give you a meekness, but we kind of think of meekness as weakness. We wouldn't take that attribute and say to a strong young man, now what I want you to be, son, is meek. And that kind of means, well, I'm going to withdraw and I'm not going to speak up and I'm going to be, it's not what it means at all. The word actually comes from a great war horse. When people had armor and lances and all that kind of thing, and then back in the Old Testament time, they would ride the horses into war, and they might have a weapon in their hands, and the horse has got to be strong and healthy and reliable and trained. That's where the word came from. What it means is this: power in control. That war horse has a bit in its mouth and some reins that reach from the bit up to the rider on its back. And the rider has control. The horse is much bigger and stronger than the man on his back. But the rider has control. And meekness means power, strength, ability, but in control. Self-control, yeah, but more than that, God control. Now, we're not going to come to a good conclusion here this morning. We're just read a letter again, a part of the letter, and it says, folks, you kind of have a choice. Think you can do it yourself, let me tell you how it's going to end up. He gives us the works of the flesh. Here's what happens when you do it by yourself. Some do it better, some do it less well, but none of it does it completely. And then he says, but you can let God come into your thinking, into your heart, into your home, into your family, into your work. You can trust him and let him work through you, and you'll become the person that God created you to be. And you know, one reason a lot of people are so miserable, so unhappy, feel always like a failure, that they've never said, God, I need your help. And it's so simple. Maybe that's why we miss it. We just need to admit we can't do it by ourselves. Because every time we do, we end up doing the wrong thing and making a mistake. And I don't mean just materially or financially or personally. Morally, we get off on the wrong track. And even the things that are pure in the right way can be misused. That's the work of the flesh, leaving God out, doing it. And in this passage overall, he's saying if you have the wrong kind of religion, if you still have the religion that you have to keep all the rules and fix it, can you fix it, but you keep trying? And he says, just admit you can't fix it. I'm going to try again. No, don't try again. Try it differently. Try God's way. And more than automatic, and quicker than you could ever imagine, a change begins in your life. When you say, I need you, Lord. He knows you do. And he's just waiting for the opportunity to help. If you'll do. That's what Paul told the Galatians. That's what this old preacher is telling you young folks in Fort Neches today. If you know him, draw even closer to him and obey him and follow. If you're still trying to do it by yourself, say yes. Come, let us help you do it. We can give you some things to read from the Word in other places and talk with you and share with you. And you'll be surprised that most of us, if not all of us, have had the same thoughts and experiences that you've had. And we fail for a while, but when we say, I can't do it by myself and let the Lord do it, we found out we could handle it. So let's stand together, please. If you need to let the Lord come into your life and expect him to bring some fruits of the Spirit, he'll do it if you'll allow him to. Maybe you need to come just publicly and say, Preacher, what do I do next? I want this. How do I get it? And we talk about that and show you in God's Word what he says. And it's really simple, but it really works. You need to come join the church. You come. We're going to sing just a word, one verse. If you'll come, we'll take some more time. But one verse is enough to get you started, and it's time for you to sing. So would you come as we sing?